Hi, I'm Scott Johnson, Professor of Law at Purdue Global Law School. The Federal Trade Commission recently decided to finalize a rule prohibiting non-competes. That means that employers will no longer be able to require employees to enter into non-competes as a condition of employment. The ruling will go into effect, or the rule will go into effect 120 days after it's published in the Federal Register. And from that date forward, businesses will no longer be able to use non-competes. They will also not be able to enforce existing non-competes, except one small carve out for senior executives, which the agency defined as those who make over a certain amount of money. I think it was $151,000 per year, and have policy-making responsibilities. One of the things that the agency found in its rulemaking process was that almost 30 million people were subject to non-competes, and that non-competes stifled competition, stifled employee wages and new businesses, along with development of patents. Part of what a non-compete does is it prevents employees from leaving their current employer and either starting their own business or going to work for a competitor in a certain area. A standard non-compete might even be for a year. So the agency found that the result of this was that employees were required to either take jobs in other areas where they might not have as much expertise and therefore make less money, or not be able to find jobs, or have to move to different geographical locations to find employment from someone who was not a competitor. The agency mentioned that they received over 26,000 comments about their proposed rule, and 25,000 of those were in support of the proposed rule. Part of the agency's decision-making process made a number of findings about the amounts of money that are involved. For example, they said it could reduce healthcare costs by $194 billion over the years and increase employee wages by $480 billion over the next decade because of some of those issues that I mentioned, with employees currently having to relocate or not be able to find jobs with high wages subject to the non-compete. And part of the idea for this rule is that the agency is in charge of overseeing fair competition. So the Federal Trade Commission in part enforces a federal statute that prohibits unfair competition. The agency has determined that non-competes are an unfair method of competition, and that's why they are prohibiting them going forward. For companies moving forward, it means they can no longer enter into non-competes with employees or enforce prior non-competes. So they'll have to come up with different ways of trying to protect different assets that were the reason for non-competes in the first place. For example, with computer programmers or developers, there can be issues with the code that's developed or things that are created during their employment, and the employer doesn't want them to take that someplace else and use it. So there are different ways that the agency mentioned in some of its publications that employers can try to do that. Trade secrets, for example, can still be protected. They can require employees to enter into non-disclosure agreements. They just cannot use the non-compete. Yes, current NDAs and trade secrets are not part of the rule, so the agency has not prohibited current practices in those areas, and mentioned in its publications today that those are ways that employers can still protect those issues, which is part of the underlying reasons for the non-competes, is to try to preserve trade secrets, creations that happen during the employment process that are part of the employer's property as opposed to the employee's property, things along those lines. It does affect a wide range of employees for sure. There's different service areas, different types of employment that are affected more than others perhaps, but the agency found a wide range of employees were affected by it. One thing that has been noted is that the rule will likely be subject to some litigation, so we'll need to see what ends up happening in the courts. It's not a great time to be an agency rule these days. The courts are getting more and more rigid or rigorous in their review of rules. The United States Supreme Court is currently deciding a case that may have some impact about what level of review courts give to a rule. So whatever the court decides on that this term could have some impact on the outcome of this rule down the road in terms of judicial interpretation about it.